Patch 1.13 just came out for Elden Ring, and if you can get past all the will no longer stagger as easily, there is this beautiful couple of lines that made one of the most unique weapons in Elden Ring actually a usable weapon, and it's now basically X tier. That is Euporia. It's here. It's damn good. Let's go. All right, before we get into this, I do apologize if some of the B-roll in this video isn't up to my usual standards. I busted up my thumb, but I'm powering through the pain for you guys to show off this weapon. So Euporia did get a lot of changes with patch 1.13. It increased the holy damage when the weapon has its luster restored, decreased the number of attacks required to restore the weapon's luster, and increased the duration of the luster restorative effect. All of this doesn't make sense if you don't understand what this weapon does. Now, what Euporia does is it has like a charging mechanic based on hitting enemies. Now, this used to be about 7 or 8 hits that you would need to do just of your light attack combos to then trigger this first tier of the luster effect, which gives you a flat damage increase of holy damage to the weapon, and then it also buffs the weapon skill. This has now been changed about 3 or 4 hits of your light attack combos and then 1 charged heavy attack. Now, on top of this, like there is that second tier as well, which does increase the damage further, and it also increases the damage of Euporia's vortex, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But the damage numbers here are significantly better. Like that first buff's probably about 100-ish damage, the second's about 50, depending on all your buffs, etc. And the decay effect is the big difference here, as it's like now takes about a minute or so to actually decay, whereas before it was like 10 seconds. And the thing is, in basically every boss fight, you're going to be dodging for like, you know, sometimes 10 seconds past and you just lose that entire buff chain and there's no point in actually using it. And because this weapon requires you to use the weapon skill Euporia's vortex, which what this does is you put the weapon forward and it like spins around in a big circle, and if you've got the actual charge effect on it, there is like a beam that comes out as well, and when you've maximized it and you're on the luster level 2, it actually lasts significantly longer. Now this effect is insane in terms of the amount of damage it can do if you can actually get it off, right? It's very easy to get staggered out of this regardless of what your poise is, because it doesn't have any hyper armor or anything like that. But if you can get that effect off and deal a ton of damage with it, it's really incredible. I personally would just be using a lot of the basic attacks here as well, because they are also incredible in terms of the amount of damage output you can do with this weapon. But then you want to dump your damage when, say, you need to finish off an enemy, or you've got like a big opening that you know the enemy is going to go through some long attack combo that you can actually use to get this effect off. But realistically, now this is probably the best Twinblade in the game. It's definitely up there, considering its damage numbers are so good, and you can get this luster effect built up very quickly. It doesn't take much effort now. You can build up that second tier, just get that flat damage increased, and then even if you don't use the weapon skill, you've got plenty of damage output that you can actually do here, which is very beneficial. And I'm comboing this with a couple of different things, including some unique talismans as well as the Sword of Darkness, which I'll get into why we're doing that right now. For equipment, I am obviously using Euporia, and I'm also using the Sword of Darkness, mostly because of the holy damage negation. Now, there are certain bosses, especially back in the main game, that do have resistance to holy damage, much like all those endgame bosses and everything. So using this, just get that 1 darkness tick off to then have that holy negation go down, and then you can follow up with basically everything with Euporia because of how good it actually is. I'm using the Erdtree seal, as it is one of the best scaling seals with Faith, and this is a purely Faith build, more or less. I'm also wearing the Divine Bird helm because this gives you extra strength and dexterity while lowering the restorative effects of your Flask of Sacred Tears. This is better than, say, like the Horn of Warrior's helm, for example, because it gives both strength and dex, and just those damage numbers work out to be a tiny little bit more than one of the other helmet options. And then otherwise, I am wearing most of Raksasha's set. Now, it is entirely up to you how much or how much less of this set you want to wear. When you do wear it, it does increase your damage dealt to foes, but it does increase the damage that you take. Typically, I like to wear about 2 pieces, like depending on the boss fights. Like harder boss fights, obviously wear less if you're going to take more damage. For talismans, I'm using the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman because enemies hit hard, the Shard of Alexander for Euporia's vortex to go off and deal as much damage as possible, and then the Sacred Scorpion Tear to raise my holy attack damage for that attack, which is primarily holy damage. Now, you've got plenty of other options here that you can tinker around with too, right? Rotten Winged Insignia, because we are using a twin blade that does have successive attacks, that's obviously perfect, as well as Millicent's Prosthetic is also great here to use as well. And then I also do like the two-handed talisman in this as well, because to just build up those effects on Euporia, you are going to use a lot of those two-handed attacks with this weapon, just like your light and heavy attack combos. So having this also gives you additional damage in that way. And then if you are struggling for things like stamina, you've got the two-headed turtle talisman, or plenty of other options that you could go, but they're the primary ones that I would focus on unless you wanted to change up this build and do something slightly different with your talismans. For incantations, I'm only using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength specifically for the buff purposes, though you could absolutely switch this up, right? Because this is such a high faith build, you could really use almost any of the faith incantations that don't require any other requirements. They're all essentially available to you if you wanted to add them to this build, whether you want some ranged option like a Knight's Lightning Spear, or you wanted to go some other route. You've got plenty of options that you can totally go, including buffs as well if you wanted to go that option. And a lot of them did actually get buffed with patch 1.13 as well, especially some of the new ones. So, you know, things like Rain of Fire, etc. are actually okay now. So you could absolutely use them as well. For attributes here, I'm sitting at level 200. This is a new game +3 playthrough, and I'm sitting at 60 vigor. Because we're going to be a little bit more in melee range with this build, I've gone a little bit higher in vigor than I typically personally would. For mind, I'm sitting at 30 and 35 endurance. You can tinker with these numbers a little bit if you prefer. Once you get your faith to 80, there isn't much point in investing further in that because of the diminishing returns that you get basically from the point of 80. You're better off putting some of those extra points into strength and dexterity, which you'll then get benefits from. And my strength and dexterity numbers are a little bit odd here because I am wearing that divine bird helmet as well. Also, if you like what we do here, consider hitting that like button or subscribing, or the membership program. For just $1, you can get early access to videos like this and all of my other guides, build videos, and those cheeky long form essays we do. Plus, there are other benefits like members only channels in the Discord, merch, and more. So if you like what we do here, please consider hitting that join button or subscribing, as it helps me more than you know. But enough of that, back to the video. A couple of quick tips for this build. For the Great Rune here, I'm using Radahn's Great Rune for the HP, FP, and stamina. Though you could absolutely use Godric's Great Rune here because you will actually get a little bit of extra damage from both the strength, the dex, and the faith scaling here. So both of those are perfect. For Wondrous Physique, I'm using the Holy Shrouding tier to increase the damage of my holy attacks, and the Opaline Hard tier just for a little bit of extra defense. So you could absolutely switch this up to the Thorny Cracks tier if you wanted to go down that route just for even more additional damage. And then I am obviously using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength as other buff options just before we entering the fight. Something to note with Euporia as well is that it doesn't work on those that live in death. So your Ghost Flame Dragon or your skeletons, etc. You won't actually get that luster effect on them. You'll still deal decent damage to them because they're all weak to holy damage. But if you're fighting an enemy with Euporia and it doesn't actually get that luster effect, now you know why. Now, I did mention earlier in the video about trying to find that balance between using the weapon skill and just using the basic attacks. When you use that weapon skill, Euporia's Vortex, you will lose all of those buffs, right? Like you're essentially dumping those buffs into that ability. Now, if you use it at the wrong time and you get like knocked out of it, you essentially just got to build it all the way back up and you've just like wasted that effect, right? So it's really important that you use it during enemy transitions when they're transitioning phases, or you've got like big gaps so that you can actually get this off. Or if you just need the range damage, as even without hitting it with the Twinblade effect, the range here is still really good. But legitimately just using the basic combos here is just fine, right? You don't have to feel like the pressure to dump yourself into using, you know, the weapon skill itself, because it's a fantastic twin blade on its own. Twin blades have great attack combos. You've also got the extra damage effects that you can get on this on top of that, right? And then, you know, we've talked about ways to increase your holy damage output as well as reduce the holy damage negation that enemies have with the Sword of Darkness. So just plenty of like great synergies with this weapon before you even talk about using the weapon skill, which obviously you can and should be using because it is fantastic. It's one of the best things about this weapons kit, plus the luster effect. But I just wanted to reiterate here that you don't necessarily need to feel the pressure to quickly build that up and then dump it all into the weapon skill, because you will absolutely get knocked out of it. And it's sometimes better to just hold on to that buff if you can't actually get that effect off in a comfortable way. But it was just something that I wanted you guys to think about. But let me know what you think about this build in the comments down below. Thank you guys for bearing with my terrible gameplay today. I appreciate y'all. Thank you to the members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.